Well, not since reading Brent Weeks and then interviewing him years ago, confirming my suspicions that he was a Christian, have I read someone's work and been haunted by the question, is this person a Christian? Because they are doing and saying things in their writing that I just don't think you get outside of Christian thinking. Well, around 3 years ago, when I started channeling my lifelong hardcore DC fandom into my content creations in my Essential Issues weekly video series and podcast and on the Christian Geek Central podcast, I also started noticing some curious traits and trends in the writing of Jeremy Adams at DC Comics. Things that made it seem like he might be subtly writing from a Christian perspective. I couldn't find anything in online searches that confirmed or denied my suspicions, and as the years passed, it only plagued my curiosity more as these trends in his writing seemed to be continuing. Well, recently I finally got the answer to my question, but before I share that and my reactions to that information, I thought I'd take you on a little journey highlighting all the times I wondered if Jeremy Adams is a Christian based on his writing. You can tell me if you think my reasoning makes sense or if I was just seeing things that weren't intended. It's been an interesting exercise in discernment regarding the worldview behind creative work I'm enjoying, and I hope you'll find it fun and useful as you sort through what seem to be themes popping up in your entertainment. Here we go. But one thing that I have to say that's very interesting that I'm seeing in Jeremy Adams' writing so far, God is being mentioned. Not necessarily the Christian God, but God is being mentioned, referred to with a male pronoun. And so there's a sense of this traditional references to God. The specter shows up. This is in a book that I haven't, that's not part of these ones that I've mentioned. It's one I read last night. Specter shows up, refers to God. Wally is referring to God briefly. In her internal monologue, Linda mentions God. Now, you can do that in other books and not have any, raised eyebrows from me. But it's just frequently enough that I did some Google searching trying to figure out, is Jeremy Adams a Christian or Jewish or what's he got going on? Because I feel like I got to go pick up my son. But I feel like maybe there's something in his outlook, spiritually speaking, that is more traditional and closer to the God of the Bible than is typical in other writers, and I wonder what that is. I can't help but wonder. Anyway. And his wife, Linda West, Linda Park is her maiden name, but she has powers, and they don't know where they came from, and they're super speed powers. His kids, of course, is Irie and Jay. They've got their powers back. And then we also find out, again, I'm going to just go into spoilers here, she's pregnant. She's pregnant, which I did not see that happening, because they've got 2 kids already. But I think Jeremy Adams, I found out last week is the name of the writer, and I mentioned last week I'm wondering kind of if he's faith adjacent, Christian adjacent in some way, or maybe he's a professing Christian. There's just been little hints of things that line up his writing with things that I think would resonate with Christians. The more regular references to God and using the male pronoun, which is that's almost, I feel like in some circles, taboo or out of date or whatever. Even though there's, biblical linguistic reasons why you would use the male pronoun. Anyway, I don't need to get into all that. And the fact that he's writing from a family perspective, as far as I know, he is still married and has 2 kids at least. And so he's a family man, and the way he's writing this family and their relationships, and just giving attention to the traditional biological family, So if not, I don't have any direct reasons to think, he maybe is a Christian, but there's just some things that, like the word traditional comes to mind, and you would associate these kinds of things also with, I think, with Christian values. So it's just interesting. It's just interesting. I'm not going to be, disappointed or whatever if I find out at some point he's not a Christian. In fact, he's coming from a very different perspective. I still appreciate the focus that he's giving in his series to the family, and the fact that DC is supporting him and allowing him to do this. What's going to be interesting to me is, well, first off, I want to say it's the family vibe done right. Back in the day, they tried to give Wally and Linda kids, and it just didn't feel right, didn't feel natural, it didn't feel like it was being written from an authentic place, a place of knowledge about families, or I don't know, something felt off. Again, like I said last week, I should really go back and read those to see if that would actually, if they'd hit me that way now, because maybe they were written great, and I just wasn't in the stage of life to appreciate it. But anyway, I feel like this is family done right in a superhero book. I'm wondering about this baby. I'm assuming it's going to be born, but like, are they going to age it up quick? It feels like whenever there's a baby born in comics, they just can't stand to let it remain a baby, Or if it's a little kid, they just can't help themselves from aging them up. They did that with John Kent, and of course, comics have been doing that for decades. I'm not even a Marvel guy, and I seem to remember that the Reed and Sue Fantastic, what's their Richards? That Franklin, they had baby Franklin. Are any of you guys impressed that I was able to pull out that name, Franklin Richards? Oh my gosh, please be impressed. I'm not a huge Marvel guy. But I mean, they just tend to age these children up. Particularly to, like, man, I almost want to say what they think the age of consent is, or the age of romance or sexual tension or whatever. And I'm just like, just let them be kids. Let them be kids. I don't know if they feel like that it would be weird to see this kid not age. I don't know. If you've been watching The Simpsons for years, then you're fine with Bart and Lisa not aging. I understand that maybe you're going to want to deal with some kind of progression. But I think that's the way. Take your time. Take your stinking time. And just let it happen gradually. I know you're thinking to yourself, well, if someone's tracking with this, they're eventually going to do some math, and Bruce Wayne's going to be 80 years old. Or okay, well, every 10 years you have some kind of a multiversal cosmic reset, and that'll just explain it. And everything will be fine, okay? But slow down, because there's some great stories, some great life that can be explored if you allow these children to remain babies, toddlers, children, gosh. So, and Wally and Linda, it was kind of a surprise pregnancy. They weren't trying. And Wally's like excited, but also like, oh my gosh, now we're gonna deal with poop being everywhere again, and diapers and stuff, and I don't know if I'm ready for this, and it was just great to see that kind of interaction, and to see the commitment between the two of them, and how Linda was like, he was like, things were just starting to settle down. She's like, Wally, life has not settled down one bit since I met you, and I'm fine with that. We are going to be good with that. We can do this, Such a cool little moment. So I hope that this writer kind of has a frozen family age in mind for a good long while, because there's some great stories to tell in that kind of setting that are just not being tapped into. There's a whole dynamic there that could be so unique, and I think so appreciated. In the same way that I'm not, a senior citizen, but I really value having senior citizens in stories, and having older, 60s through 80s and, even above that in stories, whether it's superhero stories or whatever. Just like, let's mix up the generations a little bit, instead of people in just their sexy bodybuilding 20s and 30s or whatever. So, because there's great stuff, great dynamics, great relationship dynamics. Anyway. Next up, we have The Flash number 795, and I've really been liking what writer Jeremy Adams has been doing with this book, his focus on family, and there's, I'll say it again, some interesting little, I don't know if clues is the right word, because that's kind of presuming maybe too much, but possible indications that Adams either is a Christian or was brought up in an environment that was culturally Christian in some way. There's just his voice in writing, at the very least, has a more traditional vibe to it in the way he has characters behave, the kinds of things that he has them say, and there was some more of that going on in The Flash number 795. The issue starts out with Jesse Quick kind of suiting up not as Jessie Quick, which was a name she took in respect or reverence or whatever, or like carrying on the legacy of her father, now deceased, Johnny Quick, the Golden Age hero. Well, her mother was Liberty Bell, another Golden Age hero. And she's also been known, although less often, to take up the mantle of her mother as a new Liberty Bell instead. She has inherited both super speed powers from her father and super strength powers from her mother. And so in this scene, at the very beginning, she's got an internal monologue that's kind of talking about the history of Liberty Bell as a hero and linking it to the actual Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. So I'll just share the first part of this internal monologue. She says, on July 8th, 1776, a bell rang from Independence Hall in Philadelphia, calling all the citizens together as the Declaration of Independence was read aloud. Years later, abolitionists looked to the bell as a symbol, giving it the name Liberty Bell, declaring it a beacon of freedom for enslaved people, based on the piece of scripture written on it. And then she quotes, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." And of course, I didn't know this about the Liberty Bell, but you better believe I was going to look this up. This is actually taken, and I don't know if the Liberty Bell has this entire verse on it or just what what Jessie Quick here quoted, but it's taken from Leviticus 25:10, which in the ESV reads, "And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan." The Old Testament, I've talked about this recently in the Bible study content we've been doing on Christian Geek Central, but the Old Testament concept of slavery was not meant to be abused as it historically has been. In many cases, it was a means for someone without money to repay debts that they owed. This is one of the reasons why a number of translations don't even use the word slave, because it just inescapably has that context of horrible abuse, but we'll use the term bond servant instead, since it doesn't have all that baggage and really does mean something different than slavery. So there was this idea of bond servants that had one reason that they were in servitude to someone else was to pay off a debt that they didn't have the financial means to pay off. But in this 50th Jubilee year for the Israelites, they were commanded to basically cancel debts and let those in debt be free and return to their families. It's really interesting. This verse isn't just about saying that people shouldn't be slaves in the sense of American slavery. Of course, that would be an obvious, like overly obvious thing to take from this verse. But the principle actually goes much further than merely everyone being free. It was meant to facilitate and celebrate freedom from debt and engaging in a way of life that isn't obsessed with making sure everyone gets the money they think they deserve. Because remember, these debts were being canceled, and so people that were owed money were having to say, it's going to be all right. I don't need to have the rest of that repaid to me. And so instead, it was all part of this framework that was intended to be about community, caring for each other, loving for each other, living in a society of grace, forgiveness, and support, to make sure that everyone's needs are met. The Jubilee year referenced in this verse was just one component of this framework for a totally different way of life in submission to God and in love for others, that was improved on by the kingdom of God that Jesus introduced and will be perfected in the future culmination of Jesus' reign on earth. The makers of the Liberty Bell may have not had these ideas in mind. I have no idea. And Jessie Quick, as Liberty Bell, mainly seems to have freeing people from alien invaders in mind as like the appropriate reason for, you know what, this situation calls not for Jessie Quick, but for Liberty Bell. And so she changes her costume and takes on that mantle. And so, it's this kind of a cool moment that's nicely motivated by the history and legacy that she bears from her mother's side. And there's a moment in here that actually caught me off guard. I was like, oh my gosh, I think I'm about to cry. What in the world is this? They've got this plan to knock down this wall, basically, and it kind of hinges on Jessie Quick. They're going to lend her their Speed Force power to help her with her super strength to kind of knock down this wall. And as they're running toward it, Barry says to her, we're almost up to the wall. You're up, Liberty Bell. And in that moment, in her hero moment, Of course, we would expect maybe that she would say the speed formula that she learned from her father, 3x2 times 9yz times 4a, which really helps her focus in on that interdimensional construct that unlocks her and before her, her father's super speed abilities. But when the moment comes, what does she do? She does quote the speed formula, but before that, this time out loud, not in an internal monologue, she says with grit and determination on her face a portion of that verse in Leviticus: proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And then she says her speed formula and goes to town and has the big hero moment. Now, plenty of writers that are not Christians still look at the Bible as literature, as culturally significant, and it is both of those things as well. But it's still just like another creator who was telling this story, I think, would just go so far as saying what the Liberty Bell symbolized and what it was about. I don't know that they would bother quoting the scripture on it. And so the fact that he takes the time to quote that scripture and then brings it back a few pages later and makes it part of kind of of Liberty Bell's driving motivation in her big hero moment, I think is just one of many little flags that just make me realize, Jeremy Adams, wherever he's coming from, there's a freshness and a difference to it than where most other writers in comic books are coming from. And of course, as a Christian, I don't think that we should be looking for affirmation of what we believe in our entertainment. We shouldn't be going to entertainment for that, or be frustrated when it doesn't give us that, or when it preaches something else. Nevertheless, there was still this kind of welling up of emotion that a superhero in this universe that I care about so much would, in the moment that they are going into battle, be bringing scripture to mind. Even though for Liberty Bell, for very different reasons, I have no reason to think that she's Jewish or Christian, but it was still a striking moment for me just to see how that played out. There's also another moment earlier on where Irie, Wally West's daughter, in his absence, says that, he agrees with Barry that no one should be left behind that might be able to be saved. She says, yeah, Dad wouldn't want that, and then quotes what he said in a previous issue: a West always saves the day. And she adds, it's kind of our thing. And I think that's really interesting, because it's saying that her identity is a West, is a member of this family that is bound together by biology and marriage. And I think it's much more common today to see affirmations of found families, and certainly the Flash book for many years, especially more recently as the phrase found family has kind of come into popular vernacular. It's become more of a thing in the Flash book, but it's always been this ensemble cast that treat each other like family, and refer to each other sometimes loosely as family, and that's become more and more the case. But it's a little bit sad to me when I see found families being emphasized so much in fiction, and biological families and families by marriage not also being affirmed. And so I think this is really neat to see the importance of families by marriage, families by biology being affirmed as valuable. I don't think that our ultimate identity, our most important identity, is found in the families that we were born into. Our most important identity is being made as image bearers, being made in the image of God, and being made to bear his image, to reflect in some way who he is throughout our day-to-day lives, and then perfectly in eternity we will reflect elements of his character. So I think that, of course, found families are important, and being a Christian and being adopted into God's family, especially, is the ultimate identity that's the most important. But when even the Bible talks about the family of God, it's giving us this point of reference in biological families, families by marriage, that we're comparing things to. And so when we say, oh, these people are like family to me, well, what do we mean? In order for that to mean anything, there has to be a family by marriage and biology that we're taking that metaphor from. And so I think it's really important to encourage and hold up examples of healthy families by marriage and biology. And so it's really cool to see that happening right alongside them showing this beautiful found family in the Flash ensemble cast. Green Lantern number 4, but there's this great conversation that the two have, kind of talking about how Wally, Barry Allen's former Kid Flash sidekick, is not only married, but they've just had their third kid, and he tells that to Hal, and Hal's like, seriously? And then Barry's like, yeah, and Dick and the Titans are standing in for the League. Roy found his daughter, and Hal's like getting old, and so they're kind of like having this realization that some of these heroes that are younger than them are actually entering into these more mature stages of life before they are. Then Barry really asks Hal what is my question, maybe the question of other readers as well. He says, Hal, what's going on? Why is Carol, this is the longtime love interest, the Lois Lane for Hal Jordan, why is Carol engaged to someone that's not you? And these two have had an on-again, off-again relationship over the decades, but I feel like I can't help but wonder if Jeremy Adams, the writer, is asking this question through the Flash and stating his intentions, really, to like, listen, this is not right. This is not how this should be. Carol Ferris is Hal's Lois Lane. We need to grow these characters up. We need to advance their relationships. And if that's the case, that's speculation on my part, but if that's the case, I am totally on board with these heroes growing up and developing their relationships instead of bouncing around to a series of surfacey relationships. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in my mid-40s. I felt the same way in my 20s, just seeing Kyle Rayner go from one relationship to the other that was going nowhere and really surfacey and advancing into bedroom stuff way too quickly. And so Flash really says something really mature to him and says, stop trying to chase her, because he's like, I don't know how to do this. And he's like, well, stop trying to chase her and be the friend she fell in love with. And so I just love that, just even slightly more adult perspective on relationships in comics here. And so I'm hoping that this is where Jeremy Adams is going to bring some of that more mature family valuing angle into this book that he was kind of exploring a bit in his run on The Flash. Green Lantern number 11. Meanwhile, Carol Ferris, who clearly has some unresolved feelings, some remaining feelings for Hal, is with her current fiance, boyfriend, can't remember exactly what their status is, and while she is processing her feelings about Hal, she, in seeming desire to put them to rest, says to her boyfriend, we should get married, we should do this today, and so they rush off to Vegas to get that done. And in this subplot, we've got another example of, I've said before, I have no idea where Jeremy Adams, the writer of this series, is, but in the pages of The Flash, I was picking up what I thought was at least some Christian influence, not just Christian culture, but specifically Christian values, kind of like bubbling to the surface. Whether he himself is a Christian or not, I have no idea, but maybe from cultural osmosis, family osmosis, he picked up some stuff. But another example would be here, where with this subplot with Carol going off with her boyfriend and them getting married in Vegas, I think we are clearly meant to see this decision as foolish and as really a devaluing of marriage. They go to this chapel of solitude in Vegas, themed around Superman, where they have all this themed merchandise they can buy. They can dress up in Superman and Supergirl costumes if they want, and they say, "We'll get you married faster than a speeding bullet," is their catchphrase, their slogan. And when her fiance asks, is this, and they just answer, legal? Yes, as members of the Church of Krypton, we're recognized by the state of Nevada with the ability to confer marriage. That's the American way. Signed here, here, and here. And I think we're clearly supposed to see this as kind of ridiculous and without value. I think we're supposed to say to ourselves, oh my gosh, anybody that just makes up some crazy church can do this. What is happening to marriage that this can be done so quickly and easily and meaninglessly? The rings that you can buy at the chapel itself are themed around kryptonite, the different colors of kryptonite. It's just kind of ridiculous. And the vows, we live in a time where personalized vows that couples write for each other have become more and more common, and some of them can be very good, but some of them, they really go they really go off the rails, away from anything that's truly meaningful, truly a commitment. And I think that's exemplified in the vows here, where the officiator, dressed up as Superman, spit curl and all, says, "Do you, Nathan Broom, take Carol Ferris to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to treat her with truth and justice and work toward a better tomorrow together?" And then to Carol, he says, "And you, Carol Ferris, do you promise to be stronger than a locomotive, to leap over tall problems together as one, to make this marriage a marriage of steel?" He prepares to wrap up saying, "Now, if anyone with X-ray or heat vision sees a reason these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your..." And then, of course, we do get an interruption. But I mean, up to this point, I think we're supposed to very reasonably look at this and say, this is ridiculous. This is without meaning. What they've done, they've twisted this. They've made up their own version of what this is. And it's a really sad thing to see. Green Lantern number 12. Carol Ferris, the only remaining Star Sapphire since the core of them was taken out by the United Planets, shows up very suddenly and saves the day, gets Hal out of there, and takes him back to Earth where he can recover and they can share a really, to me, valuable moment. While he's recovering, Carol quietly sits down next to him and said, "I was just a few words from getting married, from doing what I thought was the right thing, the predictable thing, trying to figure out a way to break whatever this is between us. But I don't think it can be broken," meaning I think this connection between them that's been going on. They've been the on-again, off-again relationship of Hal Jordan throughout the decades. She says, "Hal, I've known you my entire life. I know what you are and I know what you aren't. And at some point, I thought I wasn't giving myself a fair chance. No one stays with the first person they've loved, right? They move on, they discover themselves. But you know what I discovered, Hal? I don't want anyone else. I don't want someone that's predictable. I don't want someone that doesn't challenge me. I want you and whatever insanity comes with that stupid grin of yours." And then he says, "Carol," and he's about to say, presumably I love you, but then there's an explosion that rocks the trailer that they're in, and bad guys show up, and, we're going to see what happens next time. But I thought there was just some really neat points in what Carol was saying here that are worth focusing on, maybe especially in light of the fact that this represents something much closer to agape love, the love that Jesus taught in the New Testament. And there's a form of that Greek word that is used in Green Lantern comics. The queen of these Amazons, if I remember correctly, her name is Agapo or something like that, but it's clearly this modified version or this form of the word that's taken from the same root. And so somebody, I assume it was Jeff Johns at that time, knew just enough and explored just enough of New Testament Greek. That's probably where that's most known for being in terms of where people run into that word and why today. So somebody did just enough digging to really bring that little nugget out. But the Star Sapphires have really, I don't know that they've really been about a commitment to love. I haven't been following like everything that the Star Sapphires have done, and my memory is crappy. But my impression is that they kind of treat love in the same kind of romantic sense that would be meant when other people say love, or love like you really love ice cream. It's just something that you really enjoy. Whereas agape love is this selfless commitment to someone else. It's not about this kind of selfish enjoyment of something. And so that's what Carol is kind of touching on a little bit here. I mean, first, she has a realistic view of Hal. She's not all starry and, rose-tinted glasses when looking at him. She says, "I know what you are, and I know what you aren't." So she's seeing his flaws as well as the things that she appreciates about him, I think is some of the intent of that. Then she makes this really interesting observation that I wish more people would understand. She says, "I thought I wasn't giving myself a fair chance. No one stays with the first person they've loved, right?" Well, I do. I know a lot of people that do. I think that's probably more common in the church because I think there's a better understanding, at least in biblically oriented churches, on the nature of agape love and what that means for spousal love. I think a lot of people feel like they need to play the field or look around or something, or some people even feel like they need to sleep around to make sure they're quote unquote compatible with the person they're going to end up with or whatever. And that's totally missing the point of this purer, more noble, virtuous love that says, I'm going to commit to this person and I am going to love them. I mean, one of the many beautiful things about that love is that it's not just based on someone really super enjoying you. It's based on them being absolutely committed to you without condition. And so Carol is clearly coming from that broken philosophy of like, you know, it's foolish to just stay with the first person that you fall in love with because there might be something better out there. That's a very selfish view of love. Now, do people make poor choices by marrying the first person they fall in love with? Yes. But that's not a result of their love. It's a result of their lack of wisdom and understanding, counting the cost beforehand as much as they can, at least. What are some of the incompatibilities, the things that are going to be difficult about being bonded, connected, committed to this person for the rest of my life? That's where I think a lot of problems happen. They're not really counting the cost and truly engaging in the fullness of agape love, or at least attempting to, and having that as the bar in their mind when they, marry somebody that the first person they love, and then it all goes to crap later. Anyway, she goes on to describe what she wants about Hal, and it is, there's a little bit more maturity to it, I think, than some other people might have about this. I don't think it's like super sage wisdom that she's sharing here, but I think there is some maturity to it that I appreciate. She says, I don't want anyone else. I don't want someone that's predictable. I don't want someone that doesn't challenge me. So predictable meaning I assume there's some safety, some comfort in that. I don't want someone that doesn't challenge me. So in both of those, she's saying that I think what she's saying here is I want someone that I'm committing it to a partnership with, not someone that is just going to be perfect and going to fit me wonderfully and there won't be any challenge involved. She's maybe even recognizing the good in having a relationship with someone that is not perfect and needs to be worked on. And that's so much of how we grow as people, whether it's in romantic relationships or friendships, by committing to friendships and working through those incompatibilities and those differences. That is such a great source of growth and maturity. And then we just see that love maturing as well, and it just becomes more beautiful as time goes on, as opposed to the very shallow love, quote-unquote love, that so many people have and end up basing their decisions to marry on. And then when things go south and they're not compatible, things aren't working out, they dissolve the marriage. She says, not only am I ready for something that might have some complication with it, but I actually want someone that's not predictable, and I want someone that's going to challenge me. She says, I want you and whatever insanity comes with that stupid grin of yours. She knows that he brings trouble into his life and to the lives of those around him. And so it's just wonderful that she's saying, I am committed to you, and I want you, despite all of the difficulty and mess that is bound to come with that. This is a lot closer. I complained last issue that I was like, man, these marriage vows that they have in Vegas are ridiculous. And I think the writing was intended to showcase that, and that they ought to be more meaningful. These words here are a lot more substantive and meaningful than the so-called marriage vows of the last issue. And Jeremy Adams, as I've been following him in The Flash particularly, I think clearly has a love and appreciation for family, and probably along with that, an appreciation for marriage. As I've mentioned before, I don't know if he is a Christian, but I can't help but suspect with some of the things he's injected into his writing that he has at least been surrounded by Christian influence and has appreciated a lot of that influence. Whether he realizes it or not, he's benefited from it, and it's finding its way into his writing. And so I don't have any thoughts that like this is going to turn into marriage right away, but I hope, as I said last time, I hope that Jeremy Adams, or those who care about this relationship being like the Lois and Clark of Green Lantern, I hope that the writing in this book for a long time will continue to develop this relationship, and yes, that it would come to the point of maturity where they get married, and that really, and then we get to really long term appreciate their love as they are committed in the midst of difficulties with each other. That is so much more interesting to me than the so predictable CW romances in comics and, of course, on the CW, that it's like whenever there's a fight, it's like the relationship is in jeopardy. That's like, oh, are they going to stay together or are they going to break up? And I think that's so old news, and I find it so much more rich and interesting when there's a conflict that needs to be resolved between two people, but it's not a matter of, oh my gosh, are they going to break up? The question is, are they going to resolve this, or are they just going to remain miserable and have just this horrible relationship, a loveless marriage, or whatever? I mean, I think that is equally, actually, just for the sake of its novelty, a lot more compelling than the alternative. So I hope that there's a lasting vision for a long-term, basically permanent, committed relationship. Marriage, of course, would be great, but I'm not holding out hope for that. These are comic books, But man, I would love to see this relationship mature and for them to really get into some more interesting and nuanced territory when it comes to conflict in committed relationships. Green Lantern number 14, Hal Jordan has escaped from his captors, but the standout moment is a philosophical one as Alan Scott has given himself over to be captured, and the Amazo android that captured him stole his power. But as we saw, let's see, I don't think it was the last issue of Green Lantern. I think it was the last issue of Absolute Power Task Force 7, where and I believe Jeremy Adams, who writes Green Lantern, was also writing that story. Anyway, it was interesting because the Amazo android started exhibiting evidence of having free will because he absorbed all that Green Lantern energy, which that part of the spectrum is will. And so it's interesting to see these effects, and Alan Scott suspects that is what's happening and is trying then to reach out to him, to reason with him on the basis that this android has now some vestige of free will that can allow him to go against his programming. And if Alan Scott can get this thing to go against its programming, then that could be a huge weapon or element for them to leverage in the fight against Amanda Waller. And so as he is being held captive, the Amazo android is sitting down and playing chess with him, because of course when you're going to have two characters trying to outwit each other, they're going to do it over a game of chess. Well, the Amazo android, clearly superior intellect, is totally going to win this game of chess, and tells him that, Alan, you're going to lose this game in 3 moves. You might as well just give up. And Alan says, I figured 4, but you'd know, wouldn't you? And the Amazo android says, yes. If you knew you would lose, why do you play? And Alan Scott says, because sometimes there is joy in the game, in making your own choices. To which the Amazo stares at him for a moment and then replies, choices are merely pre-programmed responses. Now, this is kind of getting to the heart of what I was seeing last time, that like, okay, is the idea of free will going to be reduced to programming? That was the language that it was leaning toward and leveraging when we last saw these two characters interacting. But there does seem to be a shift here in kind of a presentation of the philosophy of what free will is. And it happens in Alan's response to that. So again, the Amazo android says, choices are merely pre-programmed responses. Alan says, if that is true, then nothing in this universe matters. But I don't believe you believe that, or you wouldn't be here playing a game with me. And just in this brief moment, he really hits on something very significant. If there is no such thing as true free will, then everything is just dominoes falling down one after the other. A predetermined path, there is no such thing as choice, and therefore there's really no such thing as value. There's no such thing as objective meaning and purpose, because it's all just dominoes falling in very intricate ways. And I think this has been a reason why proponents of atheism have fallen a bit out of favor. It's one of, several reasons, I think, is their inability to kind of deal with the idea of objective meaning. The most that they seem to be able to come up with is proximate meaning, which is this relative sense of meaning, which ultimately still is just an illusion that we kind of allow ourselves to be fooled into. But I think as the hero here, Alan Scott is saying something that we are meant to agree with. If that is true, that choices are merely pre-programmed responses, then nothing in this universe matters. And, I mean, the superhero genre is, I think, based on the assumption that justice matters, that there are virtues that matter, that people ought to adhere to, they ought to admire and aspire to. So the entire genre of superheroes can't really function on the philosophy of there being no objective purpose, meaning, or value. So he tells the Amazo-android that, nothing matters, and I don't think you are ready to live like that. And clearly, Alan is not ready to live like that. He doesn't believe that that's true. And I think that that is meant to be the assumption of readers as well, that we ought to agree that, yeah, who wants to live like that? Now, should we believe a particular worldview merely because we want to live according to it or not? No. But I mean, there is an inconsistency if we hold to a complete naturalism, a complete atheism. There's an inconsistency in assuming that we can also have objective meaning and purpose. The most we can have is illusory meaning, illusory purpose that we are agreeing to fool ourselves about. And if we are paying attention, this conversation almost comes out and says that. Not quite. But anyway, I found that very striking. Green Lantern number 15. Another interesting point in this issue is sort of the culmination, the wrap-up of the conversation between Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, depowered and in a cell, talking to his captor, the Amazo-android now known as Jadestone. So we kind of get a little bit more into the philosophical type stuff that this conversation has yielded before now. In some ways, it ends up disappointing, but in other ways, it's like, well, this actually makes sense a little bit. So let's get into that conversation a little. Alan says to Jadestone, if you choose to be a force for good, you will not only find meaning, you will give meaning to others. Jadestone asks a very important question, says, how will I know where this meaning, quote unquote, lies? What is, it seems he's asking, the source of meaning? Now, Alan Scott, despite in past issues seeming to suggest that there is such a thing as objective meaning, objective values, objective virtues, when posed with this question from Jadestone about where, what was the wording again? How will I know where this meaning lies? He says, I don't know, but I feel like you will. You'll figure it out when you're supposed to. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, I'm like, oh man, this is weak. This is weak. He was just talking in what sounded like pretty objective terms about the real existence of meaning and purpose, of real virtues, but he himself does not know where they are derived from. So it's disappointing in one sense, but also very fitting with Alan Scott, especially with how he's been changed and retconned, even though he was a character from the 1940s in a time period in America where many more people were at least nominally Christian and were at least in some way strongly influenced by Christian teaching, Christian culture. He has, of course, now been rewritten and retconned to be a much more liberal, left-leaning character, to be a gay character, and so it makes sense to me that he would be less and less tethered from where he originally started in publishing history to any kind of objective morality. Now, whether that's the viewpoint of the writer or not, I don't know. It could be that the writer has some clear ideas of where objective virtues and values and meaning are derived from. But what I'm saying here is it makes sense that Alan Scott, this shouldn't be surprising to us, that Alan Scott, at the end of the day, even though he wants to affirm the existence of objective moral values, he ultimately cannot say where they derive from, because he himself seemingly has become less and less tethered to an objective source of values, of moral duties, and of meaning in life, and is instead kind of like deriving that meaning himself, kind of conjuring it himself, which is what many people try to do, but ultimately there's no grounding to that that's actually objective. It's just purely subjective. So anyway, an interesting turn. And as Jadestone leaves to kind of mull this over, Alan Scott says to him, to be a weapon of war or a weapon of goodness. That's the choice you have in front of you. And Jadestone, goodness is the only investment that never fails. That's a pretty broad and unclear philosophical statement, but certainly from a Christian standpoint, that is absolutely true. If there are objective virtues, if there are objective moral duties, then they do have objective eternal significance. Anyway, we cut back to this scene between Nate, the agent now of sorrow, and Carol Ferris. But Nate confronts her after being left by the altar by her and says, after everything he's done, meaning Hal, who he describes as the one who leaves, the one who always leaves you, which he has done again and again, gone flying off into space. They, on and off again have a relationship that seems to be going well for a while, and then his commitments are divided. He has to go off to space, and their relationship falls apart. That's what it's been in publishing history, I feel like, for decades. And Nate says, after all he's done, after all the heartbreak, all the tears, and you still went back to him, why? And she is just being overcome by the sorrow that's being just flooded onto her by Nate. And she says, because, and then in a burst of power that pushes Nate back and is radiating out her star sapphire power, she yells, I love him, which of course love is the source of the star sapphire's power. And of course a statement like this, it's dramatic, it's comic booky, based on just the trends in comics, it shouldn't necessarily mean all that much. However, what this story seems to be building to, this is certainly in support of. I think I've been seeing for a while now the idea of Carol and Hal becoming a couple in the same sense that Clark and Lois are a couple, and that some other characters like Wally West and Linda Park. I think that this writer, Jeremy Adams, seems to want to take Hal and Carol in the direction of like they are a couple, and they might have their struggles, they might have their ups and downs, but they are done dating other people. It's just them going forward. That seems to be what they're building toward. And this would certainly be in support of that. Ultimately, we'll have to see what happens. But I think Sorrow could still be, or Nate could still be, a wonderful part of that story. After he leaves and someone asks Carol, who was that? She answers, someone I hurt, someone I have to help. I need to find Hal. And this is a very subtle way of recognizing just the harm that is done when we do not really intentionally enter into romantic relationships with really, marriage in mind. I mean, like doing the whole dating game and stuff and not really counting the cost. Carol, was looking at marriage with Nate, but not from a very healthy place, not from a place of wisdom, not from a place of counting the cost. And as a result, she took that relationship much further than she should have. And Nate was shattered by her leaving him. And yeah, as readers, I think we do want to see Carol and Hal together. But this is acknowledging that along the way to get to this point, Carol, and I think we could say the same thing about Hal for sure, Carol has hurt people, has hurt Nate. Hal, who knows how many women he has hurt as he's kind of like played the game, as it were, for decades in comics. And so I think they could do some really interesting things with, yes, solidifying these two as a couple, but at the same time acknowledging that playing the game or dating and changing relationship partners as much as they have over the years, it hurts other people and it hurts them. I think it could be really interesting to see what kinds of specific challenges Carol and Hal will need to overcome as a committed couple, given their histories of so many relationships with other people before really saying, you know what, this is the one I'm committing to no matter what. I think there could be some great stories to tell there that maybe a lot of people would relate to. So I'm still hopeful that this is the intended direction of editorial, to really make them a permanent couple going forward. I think there's a lot of great stories that could be told if they do that. And, you know, the hints that that is in fact going to be the case keep piling up. Hal and Carol finally catch up to each other. They are both relieved to see each other. And Carol basically says, you know, I think I understand what it is that you do and why you have to do it. I've spent some time with some other heroes now, and I know the sacrifice that it takes, and I think that I want to do that. I think I want to enter into that life. And he basically says, well, then I think it's time we save the universe together. And the last shot is them flying into the air to go and be a part of saving the day of what's going on with absolute power, but both with big smiles on their faces. And I feel like, okay, I think this is the moment. I think this is intended to be the new beginning for hopefully a many decades and forever hereafter status quo between Hal and Carol. Yeah, I think there could be some really cool stuff here, and I hope I'm reading the tea leaves right. That this shot at the end of this issue of Green Lantern marks the beginning of a forever after new status quo for these characters. That would be really cool. Then Green Lantern 18 kind of wraps up this big Civil Core storyline. The thing that stands out to me most in this issue was Star Sapphire when she's confronting the Predator, who up to this point had been established as the avatar, the entity representing love, but in kind of like a weird way. But now Star Sapphire, Carol Ferris, which we are reminded in this issue is the last of all the Star Sapphires. She is kind of going toe-to-toe with the Predator and confronting him and believing at this point, no, something's off. This thing is not like the avatar, the ultimate, the representative, the entity of love in the universe. And so she has this confrontation with him in which she confronts Predator based on her understanding of what love truly is. She says to the Predator, if my power is about love, then let me show you how powerful that is. And in kind of like her moment of triumph where she's giving her superhero monologue of victory, she says, love is many things. It's patient and kind, but it's also righteous and powerful. It's the power that will make someone give their life for the greater good. It's not needy. It's not a parasite that only takes. It's the power that gives, and I plan on giving it to you in spades, which seems kind of weird because then she just kind of blows him away or something. I'm not sure exactly what happens. He's like, but I love you, and then he just disappears. So I don't know if she was truly loving him and that somehow made him self-destruct. The mechanics of this moment are not really explained. But what she says about love is very interesting. She says, love is many things. It's patient and kind. I don't want to read too much into this because sometimes you'll see this passage from Scripture read at weddings that the people getting married are not Christian. They just like the way it sounds, you know. But this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 4. In the ESV, it reads, love is patient and kind. She doesn't quote the rest, which goes on to say, love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So love is the thing that more than any of those other things is going to endure. And we get some characteristics of the nature of love in that passage. Well, she goes on to say, love is many things. It's patient and kind, but it's also righteous and powerful. Now that's very interesting because the righteous aspect is something that I often, as a Christian, wish that some, usually non-Christians, but sometimes Christians as well, wish that they understood. When we talk about God being love, that doesn't mean that he is not righteous. In fact, because he is loving, he exercises his righteousness because he loves people and he loves truth. So I think it's very fitting here, even though it's not in the First Corinthians passage, it is very biblical to say this of love. It's also righteous and powerful. You know, I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure. Okay, love is powerful. But what characterizes that power? She says it's the power that will make someone give their life for the greater good. I mean, little shades of the sacrifice of Jesus. That love is self-sacrificing. Really, there's a Greek word in the New Testament that is used to describe love, and it's agape, or some form of that. And this is a self-sacrificing, others-prioritizing love. And that it certainly culminates and involves in its full form feelings of compassion and affection, but it is not always those things. It's not dependent on those things. Sometimes, I mean, it includes within it the idea of tough love, where sometimes we care about someone's well-being to the point where we're going to do what is best for them that they may not be happy about in the moment. So there's just more richness and complexity to the New Testament concept of biblical love than the CW gives us. Or greeting cards, or so many other ways that we kind of talk about love. Love is love, and whatever, you know. We have this very simplified, unexamined idea of love that's been perpetuated in the popular dialogue and in entertainment. But there is so much more richness to this the highest form of love that is presented in the New Testament. It's not needy, so that I think also speaks to the idea of it not being selfish. It's others-oriented. It's not taking, it's giving. It's not a parasite that only takes, she says. It's the power that gives. All of this very in keeping with the concept of agape love. And so I've said before that I wonder if Jeremy Adams, the writer of this comic, based on the flavoring of his writing in The Flash and some of the things that he did there and elsewhere and here, I don't know if he's a Christian, but I feel like whether he knows it or not, he's at the very least been influenced by Christian thinking in his life to have some of these kinds of ideas bubbling up, some of these philosophies bubbling up in his writing. So anyway, very neat to see that happening in the latest issue of Green Lantern. Green Lantern Fractured Spectrum #1. This is a one-shot that is kicking off a new Green Lantern epic story, and they do some interesting things here. So at this point, the corrupt version of the Green Lantern Corps has been disbanded. It's being reconstituted under the counsel, but not the authority of the Guardians of the Universe. And that's an interesting kind of take on them. I think it's probably a nice middle ground. For the longest time, the Guardians gave the orders, the Green Lanterns followed, but sometimes the Guardians were wrong or coldly uncaring, or there was just something about them that wasn't quite right all the time. And eventually we saw like some major corruption in the Guardians in some cases. And I think that kind of plays into our natural feelings to be untrustworthy of authority and to want to break out from under authority. And so, you know, you're not going to have an authority that's actually wise and good and loving. You're usually going to have authority figures be evil and corrupt and worth rebelling against. And so I understand, you know, why that's going to be popular. I like this adjustment because, as Jessica Cruz, in kind of her speech inaugurating the Green Lantern Corps, they've got the new battery set up on Oa. She says, the Guardians have returned, no longer directing our decisions, but advising us on what to do next. And I think this could be really cool, because now this switches from the Guardians potentially being a metaphor for the government or our employers or things like that, teachers, people in authority over us in these authority structures, but maybe something akin to relationships with parents or relationships to leaders in our local churches. Now, I don't think that's, well, I was going to say, I don't think it's meant to be a metaphor for that, but I mean, I still have questions in my mind about Jeremy Adams and I don't know where he's at, but there's Christian flavored stuff that keeps showing up in his writing. I don't think this is a reference to authorities in church, but it's a softer kind of authority. That's what I was getting at, is it's an authority that we ultimately have to choose how much we are going to submit to them. Our parents, especially as we get older, we're getting ready to move out of the house, or after we moved out of the house, it moves from a we have to do what they say to we ideally want to honor and respect and listen to them and consider their words carefully. And I think that there could be some storytelling opportunities here that will in some way encourage, if the guardians are actually treated as wise and worthy of listening to, I think there could be some great messaging here about, like, you know what, it's worthwhile to listen to those who are older and wiser and more seasoned than us. It doesn't mean they're infallible, but a lot of the times they have great wisdom. There are people in my life that have mentored me that I wouldn't say they're infallible. I wouldn't say I've agreed with everything that they've said and every piece of counsel they've given. But there are people in my life that I'm like, man, almost every time they say something, they give some kind of counsel, it's wise and it puts me on a better path than I was on already. And so I think having that kind of relationship dynamic modeled between people and those that they're being mentored by or counseled by, I think that's good. I think that's good to have that kind of idea played with. Anyway, Jessica goes on to kind of talk about how the bad things are right now, but she says we are not without hope, so there's that idea of hope. We have a new battery, a new will to go into the universe and protect each sector, a new chance to rebuild the Green Lantern Corps. It will not be easy. Fear, rage, hope, compassion, love, greed. Their central power batteries are no more, leaving the emotional spectrum in disarray. We are gathering reports that creatures of every type are beginning to manifest these powers all over the galaxy, untrained, chaotic. We have to find them. We have to help them. Show them what we already know, that emotion can be controlled, molded by sheer will. Interesting. There's two things there going on that are interesting to me. First, I like that Will finally here, maybe I've seen it elsewhere too, but the Green Lantern, the spectrum of colors that were created by Jeff Johns, basically implied or stated clearly, whatever the case may be, that each of these colors represents a different emotion. But I'm like, it's never sat with me well, the idea of will being an emotion. Will is not an emotion. Will is another way of describing choice. And we make choices that override emotions. At least we should be. And that's how most of us function many times. There's many situations where we have to make a choice that pushes beyond what we are feeling. So I like that separation of will as being a separate thing from emotions. I like that Jessica Cruz says that. But what's interesting is she says that emotion can be controlled, molded by sheer will. Well, I don't think that's true. I think plenty of depressed people, whether it's clinically or not, will tell you that you can't just not be sad, not be depressed by saying to yourself, I'm not sad, I'm not sad, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. That's not going to work. What you will see in good counseling in those kinds of situations, whether it's dealing with depression or anger, different types of kind of emotional problems, is at some point truth is going to be brought into the equation. That in those moments where we're feeling this intense emotion, that there's some truth that we are meant to then think about and reflect on that shapes then the way we think about the thing that's causing that emotion to come out of us. And so yes, there's will involved. I need to choose to bring to mind relevant truth for this situation, but it is the truth that shapes our perspective so that we actually do feel differently because we have changed our thinking about things. For example, if I have, now this is a crazy example, but if I have, well, let's make it less crazy. I was going to have a scenario about a car bomb. Let's talk about a roller coaster. I'm let's say I'm scared to go on a roller coaster because I think if I go on that roller coaster, the seatbelt might come undone and I'll fly out to my death in the middle of the craziest loop or something like that. And I'm just like, I can't get on the roller coaster. I can't get on the roller coaster. My friends are encouraging me, Peter, it's okay. It's going to be fine. Well, they don't know the future. I don't know the future either. But what kind of truths could shape the way I'm thinking and change my emotional state? Well, reflecting on how long this roller coaster has been in use, how many accidents have happened on this roller coaster in the past, what then is the likelihood, given some of that background data, that I will go flying out of it in the middle of the craziest loop. And so we can get some background data that then alters our understanding of the situation by shaping it according to that which is true. And then I start coming down from that because I realize, it's very unlikely. It's unlikely to the point that I shouldn't worry about it. It's not reasonable for me to be worried about that. So, is will involved in overcoming unhealthy emotions? Yes, but it must be accompanied with truth. Otherwise, there is no amount of willpower that really can go the distance. We might win a few battles here and there, but we're not going to actually have long-term victories. Love that they're kind of tapping into this topic. It looks like this upcoming story arc could really get into interesting things about the nature of emotions, the nature of will. Very interested to see what they're going to do, especially since Sorrow, the new Gray Lantern, if you will, and the first of his kind, is overcome by sadness, overcome by sorrow. And I'm wondering if there's going to be any kind of arc where he will find hope that at least temporarily will put him on a better path. I think if you want to keep him around as this great tragic villain, which I hope they do, then he can't, be cured. He has to veer away from that which would bring him hope and peace. But I'm just wondering what, if anything, is going to be said about the nature of sadness, the nature of maybe depression, the nature of all these different emotions, how will plays into it, and if truth, if Jessica Cruz's words will be found to be overly simple. Maybe in this story arc, the Green Lanterns are going to start out thinking, yeah, it just takes will. And they're going to realize at some point, will can't do it alone. Could it be that there'll be some color in the spectrum that represents truth? That'd be a little bit weird. I would think white would be the one that would maybe represent truth, but I don't know. Very curious to see what they're going to do. Aquaman number 3. Well, as I've also mentioned before, if Jeremy Adams isn't a Christian, I think he's been influenced in some ways by Christian thinking, Christian culture, and I just seem to see little bits of that kind of bubbling to the surface in multiple books that I've read of his. And in this issue, what I see thematically happening is something that resonates with me, and I think will probably resonate with a number of Christians. There's a flashback sequence that I suppose is supposed to inform some of what drives Arthur, some of his values. In this flashback, he is talking with his dad as he is a child and his dad is still alive, because I think his dad died in the comics at some point. Anyway, so this is a childhood memory at the lighthouse with his dad, who is the lighthouse keeper. And Arthur shares with him, that the kids at school were making fun of your job, Dad. They said it's a lazy job for a lazy person. His dad says, well, and what do you think? And Arthur says, don't you want to be out there, see the world instead of stuck in this old lighthouse? So there's this idea of what a significant life looks like that Arthur and his classmates have in mind, that his dad does not consider to be like the ideal, the significant, the meaningful life. Well, in the middle of this conversation, the power goes out. There's a big storm raining down. And after the lights go out, they realize there's a ship out there that is too close to the shore. And if it can't see the lighthouse, it runs serious risk of ramming into the rocks and people losing their lives. Arthur's dad sees the urgency and says if they can't see the rocks, they could rip their hull in two, and come on, Arthur, if we work quickly, we can save them. Well, at the end of the issue, because this flashback kind of bookends this particular issue, we come back to this story. They're struggling to get some kind of light working. They find one. It's not as bright as the original, but it's at least something, and it is able to stop the ship from crashing into the shore. And Arthur, just in relief in that moment, just reflects and says, if we hadn't lit the lamp, they would have crashed. And his dad says, "Do you see now? It doesn't matter what others say about me or what they say about you. Sometimes we are called to things, and this is my calling. I strive to be like this lighthouse, to serve those out there, to stand tall in the storms and light the way home for anyone in the darkness." Now, there are a number of stories in comics that can deal with characters who are marginalized by society, looked down upon, seen as other, as less than. I think of the X-Men, things like that. And there are demographics in the real world that might resonate with those ideas. They might feel like, yeah, I know what it's like to be misunderstood, judged unfairly, looked down on. And so they resonate with those kinds of character concepts. But I think Christians, fairly uniquely, can resonate with those concepts in an added way, in that the thing that we are often misunderstood, judged unfairly about, that is integral to our identity, is also driving us to want to sacrifice for others, to bring life and hope and truth that can rescue to others. That's not true of, that's not embedded into other demographics that may be looked down upon, but it is part of the core concept, the identity of the Christian. So let me read again what Arthur's dad says to him. "Do you see now? It doesn't matter what others say about me or what they say about you. Sometimes we are called to things, and this is my calling. And I strive to be like this lighthouse, to serve those out there, to stand tall in the storms and light the way home for anyone in the darkness." And he adds, "no matter what." Matthew 5:14 through, looks like 16. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." And that idea of seeing your good works, that doesn't mean just see how good and moral of a person you are and all the things you abstain from and stuff like that. No, good works in Scripture are defined by love, and we're known as disciples of Christ by the way that we love each other. So I think that is wrapped up into good works. What's fueling the good that we do is love. And what happens? People will see that, and ultimately it will lead them to give glory to God. Not everyone, of course, but just in principle. When we are living out what we are our calling, then people see our lives, and ultimately it can help them go on their own path that will lead them to a relationship with Yahweh, in which they give glory to him now and forever. Green Lantern number 21, still really enjoying Jeremy Adams' run on Green Lantern, and just thought I'd highlight the little nugget this time that once again seems noticeably consistent with a biblical Christian perspective. Let me jump to that moment here. Okay, it's near the end of the issue where Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris as Green Lantern and Star Sapphire have this encounter with Hector Hammond, who at some point, I'm going to have to track down when this happened, because I didn't catch this story, I don't think, unless I forgot. His head's shrunk now, so he's not like this just huge head with atrophied limbs. He's like a normal-looking guy, like he started out way back in the day. But they have this encounter, makes Hal suspicious, and as Hector leaves, he says, "My gut tells me something's wrong." And Carol says, "Your gut is wildly unreliable, but I agree." And I just love that little nugget there, because what do you see in Hollywood, in comics, in all kinds of mainstream entertainment writing? We've seen it for decades now. If the hero says, "I've got a bad feeling about this. My gut tells me this. I know in my heart that this," then, well, that's going to be written so that that's true. Whatever they have said is true. And so what's been put forth in fiction again and again and again and again is that feelings are reliable. We should follow our feelings, follow our gut. Our feelings are probably right. And in this case, although Carol does say, "I agree," something seems off. And then Hal follows up, said, so, okay, we go in there and we figure out the truth. Yeah, all right. So yeah, let's not depend on the gut thing. Let's actually investigate. But just the fact that she says, your gut is wildly unreliable. I was like, thank you. Thank you for casting some doubt on the nature of our gut and our inner self, because our inner self and our inner self's feelings can totally lead us astray. Jeremiah 17:9. I'm sure you guys, if you've been listening or watching my content for a while, heard me reference this ad nauseum, but it's been a little while, so here you go again. 17:9 of Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? We can't just go with our inner feelings, our inner thoughts. We've got to test those things against truth. So I just appreciate that. Well, after reading Green Lantern 21 this last week and seeing the little nugget I pointed out recently on Essential Issues Weekly, I decided to take a look at Jeremy Adams' Twitter/X profile. I think I had done this a while back, but it just involved more scrolling and reading that I had time and interest for. He's very active on there, and I wasn't quite curious enough yet, I guess. Well, this time I scrolled back through his posts, and it didn't take long to get clarity, given that Easter was just a few weeks ago. I soon ran into this tweet that settled it for me. He wrote, "He is not here. He has risen," all caps, "just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay." Matthew 28:6. Happy Easter! Exclamation point, all caps. I laughed out loud with joy. I read this, not just because it was cool to learn he's a brother in Christ, but because it felt like confirmation I wasn't insane and imagining things. Eventually, it really felt like examining the historical evidence for the resurrection, where you're just thinking, is anybody else seeing this? It really looks like there's this weirdly resurrection-shaped hole in history. So just to give closure to me, I responded to his post saying, wow, joy. Been making vids reacting to your work and sharing my suspicions you might be a believer based solely on your writing. Guess you haven't hit it, but this felt like relief to realize I'm not crazy. Spotted your latest Christian elements at 1406, and then I posted the then most recent Essential Issues Weekly, where I talked about how Christians should be like Aquaman. And he soon replied with, hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine. And then used, the crying... I'm not really a Twitter X person, the emoji for laughing and crying. And he says, yep, Christian dude just trying to do my best in the field I love. Thank you. Love the vid. Now, maybe his faith is common knowledge to lots of his fans already and has been for all I know. I certainly wasn't as hardcore in my quote-unquote investigations as I could have been, but it was still very fun to learn, and I liked getting almost all the way there just from analyzing his work. Now, I do hesitate a little bit to spotlight his faith, even to my tiny audience, because while I think non-Christians can certainly make a stink about a public figure being a Christian and mentioning that here and there, Christians can certainly make a stink about public-facing Christians not being Christian enough or according to their definitions of belief and behavior. And I just want to be an encouragement to guys like Adams. I think he seems to be wisely, tactfully navigating writing fiction that springs out of his convictions while also serving a very broad audience. I don't think anybody being reasonable would see any of his DC work as remotely preachy at this point. And yet it seems to me that he is certainly writing from his particular perspective as a Christian. And I think unbeknownst to probably a lot of readers, it is those very elements being injected into his writing that are creating something fresh and interesting, a vision of heroism and virtues to aspire to that they just haven't been getting elsewhere. So it's really benefited his content, I think, even for those that are not believers. Very cool to see how well he's been navigating that and serving both truth and his wide range of readers who have, of course, a spectrum of different worldviews. So there you have it. Going forward, I will still ultimately have to speculate whether or not Adams is injecting certain ideas intentionally or not, but this does make the game fun now in a new way. Thanks. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.